in order for us to fulfill what God expects from us. Abraham couldn't make his sacrifice at any place. He was required to go to a very specific mountain. Even though he didn't understand or know what was going to be the outcome of presenting his only son, he followed the place. He followed God's direction to the place. One final example. This is something all of us would be familiar with. We remember that God used Moses to bring all the Hebrews out of bondage, out of Egypt. And they had to navigate through the wilderness to get to the promised land. Now, what we also learn in that journey is that God designated a very specific mountain to meet with the Hebrews. They would travel through several oases, water places where they could water the cattle, where they could water themselves. They passed by different mountains and hills, but there was a very specific mountain that God had designated. Meet me at Mount Sinai. That was the chosen place for God to meet with his people. Here's the teaching point here. Sometimes we're asking ourselves, what is God's will for my life? And we're busting brain cells trying to understand what is it that God wants to do with my life. And I want to help us understand until we find our place, we won't understand God's will in our life. You can't be out of place and walk in God's will. Just like I said at the beginning, when we have furniture in our house, just because you have a couch that you bring into the house doesn't make the couch functional until it's in its right place. As a matter of fact, you might try this when you get home. Take the couch and put it in the bathroom. First of all, let's see if you can even get it in the bathroom. It won't fit because that's not the right place. It doesn't mean that the couch itself doesn't have a purpose or it doesn't have a function. It cannot function if it's not in its right place. So I want you to see the application. You and I, it's not enough just to know God's will. We actually have to find our specific place where God wants to operate in our life. God's divine purpose is attached to placement, to you and I being where we are supposed to be. I could get real personal with this, even in my own life. In the past 30 years in ministry, I've had to move from one location of ministry to another. And in several cases, it was not my specific desire. As a matter of fact, for those of you who I had the privilege to share and to fellowship with in ministry here in this state, in New Mexico, when it was time for me to move, it was one of the hardest decisions that I had to make in my life because I believe this was the place. This was where God wanted me to be. And what I learned is that God's place is seasonal. He will call us to a specific place for a specific time, for a specific season. And just as he did with navigating the children of Israel through the wilderness into the promised land, the promised place, there were times where they would rest in one area, and then the cloud, the glory, the presence of God would move them to a new area. So when it was time for me to leave New Mexico, man, I was kicking and screaming, God, I don't want to go. This is where I want to stay. But God had a purpose attached to my life that required me to change my place. So I think there's a word in there for somebody who's watching right now.